Hello, friends. Welcome to Be Waste Wise. I am Shweta. I am a community builder at Be Waste Wise, and this is our first panel for the year 2019. And we are going to discuss World Bank's report, which is titled Water Waste 2.0, a global snapshot to solid waste management to 2050. And we have the lead author of the report with us today. And we also have a peer reviewer of the report here today to speak about this. So I'm just going to jump right in and hand it over to Silpa and Catalina. They are going to introduce themselves first, after which they will go over the slides about, and talk a little bit about the report, after which we'll do a Q&A. First, I will have a set of questions, after which we will take the audience questions. So over to you, Silpa.
Okay, thank you, Sweta, and thank you, Be Wastewise, for hosting us today. We're very excited to talk about the report and what the World Bank does in waste management. My name is Silpa Kaza. I'm an urban development specialist at the World Bank, and I focus on waste management and low carbon planning.
Thank you again, Sweta. This is very exciting for us to be here. It's my first Be Wastewise, and yeah, I really am excited to talk to people about what we do at the bank and the report specifically. My name is Catalina Marulanda. I'm an urban specialist that worked for many years in the solid waste management sector, and I now manage the urban unit for South Asia. So working in all the countries in the South Asia region in the bank.
Okay, so I'll start off by giving you a presentation. Okay, so we're going to dive right into the report. So for Water Waste 2.0 builds on a previous report, actually, called What a Waste, a global review of solid waste management, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But for Water Waste 2.0, we collected data on 217 countries and economies and nearly 370 cities. And we collected data on waste generation, collection, treatment, disposal, operational models, financing, informal sector, public awareness, communications models, institutions. So we really, collected data on everything we could get our hands on. And so I'm just going to talk about the main findings from the report. And I just want to say that this was actually funded by the government of Japan through a partnership with the World Bank called the Tokyo Development Learning Center. So the three main things that I want you to leave the webinar with today are, first, that waste generation is expected to increase by 70% by 2050. And we're expecting that Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia will be the fastest growing regions, making up a little more than 1/3 of our waste by 2050. Second, 1/4 of the municipal plastic waste globally is coming from the East Asia and Pacific region. And third, nearly half of waste operations involve the private sector, nonprofits, and civil society. So there's ample room to engage with the right partner. In 2016, we estimated that the waste being generated was around 2 billion tons, and that by 2050, this will be about 3.4 billion tons. And we found that there's a positive correlation between waste generation and urbanization. And so, which makes sense why Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia are the fastest growing regions. In Sub-Saharan Africa, we're expecting waste to nearly triple, and in South Asia, we're expecting waste to nearly double. We also see a relationship between per capita waste generation increasing with income. High-income countries generate about 1/3 of the world's waste, with just 16% of the population. So if you look on this graph, you can see that the quantity of waste generated really varies by region. So in Sub-Saharan Africa, it's less than 0.5 kilogram per person per day. But in North America, we're looking at over 2 kilograms per person per day. and the average is around 3/4 of a kilogram per person per day. We all know that the composition of waste varies by income, and this report further highlights that in low-income countries, we're seeing that about 56% of the waste in low-income countries is organic waste, and just about 16%, potentially recyclable waste. Whereas in high-income countries, half the waste is recyclable waste, and less than a third of the waste is organic waste. And so when we're thinking about organic waste and especially plastics, first looking at organic waste, we see that food loss and waste from the agricultural side as well as the waste management side amounts to 30% globally. And then on the plastic side, we're seeing that plastic waste is growing rapidly. In 2016, we estimated that there were 242 million tons. And if you want a visual of what that means, it's comparable to 24 trillion plastic bottles or 4.8 million Olympic-sized swimming pools. We found that 3 regions account for 60% of the plastic waste generation, with, again, 1/4 coming from East Asia and Pacific. Low-income countries are collecting only 39% of their waste, versus in high-income countries, we're seeing nearly universal waste collection. About 1/3 of waste globally is being dumped, and in low-income countries, this is more than 90%, even though we're seeing that nearly 40% is being collected. 90% overall is being dumped, or more than 90%. And if you look at the pie chart, you can see that about 70% of our waste is going to either a dump or some type of landfill, whether it's a controlled landfill or not. And about 19% of our waste is being recovered through recycling and composting. Solid waste management contributes to 5% of global emissions, looking at just the waste management portion. And so this means in 2016, the 1.6 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions will be jumping to 2.6 billion tons by 2050. We also found that the poor are the most affected by inadequate waste management, and we see that over and over in our work as well. But it's often the poorest in the society that don't have waste management services, have waste dumped by them, or are living by them, or have their livelihoods depending on the sector. And again, it's usually the most vulnerable who's really depending on the sector for their livelihood. The elderly, women, children, migrants, unemployed. And just to give you a sense of, 2 numbers, in Dhaka, we found that there are 96,000 informal waste pickers, and the informal sector is responsible for 10% of the city's waste collection services. Oh, sorry, that's in Cairo, actually. And then in Dhaka, there are 120,000 waste pickers, and 90% are female. So we found that 30% of countries do not have any institutions or policies to address waste, and that waste is overwhelmingly a local government responsibility, but we see that local governments often lack the funds, and they're only able to cover half of investment costs for waste systems, with the remaining coming from national government, IFIs, private sector. More than half of services are operated by public entities. 1/3 involve a public-private partnership, and the remaining are either, direct partnership with the private sector or an NGO, civil society. In low-income countries, for where data was available, found that waste management takes up about 20% of municipal budgets, and really contrast that with the number we mentioned earlier, that more than 90% of waste is being dumped. In high-income countries, it's about 4% of municipal budgets on average. And then you can see that, when looking at absolute numbers, high-income countries are paying more than $100 per ton to manage their waste, whereas low-income countries are paying about $35 per ton. And, we really want to use all of this data as a call for action, and really, that it's quite alarming. And so let's focus on what we can do right now. The three main areas we see are, one, focusing on sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, because by the growth between now and 2050, half of that is coming from those two regions. And also, most of the waste is being openly dumped there. So more than 2/3 of the waste is being openly dumped currently in those two regions. Second, really focusing on the 5 countries in Asia to tackle the marine litter problem. And the bank is involved in business in those countries. And third, really finding the right partner. So adopting the regulations and incentives to attract the right financing and the right partners to implement effectively and in a financially sustainable manner. So with that, actually, let me hand it over to Catalina. And please know that all of our, the publication and all of the data is posted at worldbank.org/what-a-waste.
Thank you, Silpa. So I just want to take 2 minutes now following on the presentation to underscore a couple of points, and then we open it up to questions, which I think is going to be the important part of this discussion. And I wanted to introduce, for those of you who don't know the World Bank very well, might not be aware of what we do, is how we work in the solid waste management sector and how we work with countries and local governments and civil society to address different issues of waste. So we finance, typically we are a bank, a development bank, that finances infrastructure and capacity building and institutional building in the developing world. And as such, then we engage and we work in all of the regions in the world. So as Silpa mentioned, the different distribution of the solid waste generation, particularly in this sector that we're focusing on today. And so we work in all of these regions in different ways. And it's very important to remember that, what we do in Latin America is very different than what we do in Africa, very different than what we do in South Asia. Yet we are able to, because we have people spread out across the world, to learn from what is happening in the different countries, to understand what is happening in the different countries, and to bring experiences and knowledge from one country to the next to try to address these difficult issues of solid waste management. So I'm working now, for example, in South Asia, where the issues are very urgent, very acute, and when there is a lot of innovation that is happening and a lot of learning that we can bring from what we know that happens in other countries. And I think out of what Silpa was mentioning, the key driver of how urgent our engagement, not just from us but from everyone, is this push for urbanization. No? So these regions, Africa and South Asia, that are the least urbanized, meaning where the majority of the population still lives in rural areas, and we know it is migrating to urban areas. That is the way that countries develop. People move from the rural areas to the urban areas, and in Africa and in South Asia, this is happening at a very, very fast rate. So in South Asia, for instance, we are expecting that in the next 20 years, not even 20 years, 15 years, by 2030, 300 million people are going to move from rural areas to urban areas. That is in the 8 countries in South Asia. You are getting 300 more people moving to cities. In India alone, that is 10 million people per year that are moving to the cities. So imagine the amount of waste that gets produced by an additional 3 million people in cities, 10 million people, sorry, that are already as congested and as busy as Calcutta, Delhi, Mumbai. And how are cities then set up to accommodate this waste, to collect, transport, and adequately dispose of this waste? And what can we do to help the governments to address that? And so a key driver, as I was saying, is how urbanized the country is. And another thing that we really need to look at and to put in perspective is how mature the sector is. No? So you have on the one side the national regulations and institutions that deal with waste, from the ministries of environment and urban development to the cities that manage the waste. And then you have how much intervention, as Silpa was saying, you have from the private sector, from the informal sector, from civil society in general, how much this is how important this is in the level of priorities of these cities. You can imagine, if you are a mayor of a city that is growing at this rate, the number of priorities is enormous. And the infrastructure that you need, the finances that you need, the capacity that you need it ranges from education, health, water, roads, jobs, and solid waste is one of those many priorities. No? So how does this rank in the priority list? And we see that as the cities grow and as more and more waste is generated, this really becomes a very big priority. You know, it's not just a very expensive sector to cover, but if you don't have the adequate setup, then waste starts appearing everywhere, and it starts interfering in health. It starts interfering in drainage. It starts interfering in the way that people move around the city, in the way that the city is attractive and livable to people and to the private sector that comes and invests in the city. So it really is, the entry points are many, and we really try to understand how a city and how a country is positioned to manage their solid waste management sector. And given that, and given what we know from other countries, then we try to come in and work in the institutional side, in the regulatory side, in the infrastructure financing side, or just raising awareness in seminars like this, developing knowledge, collecting data. We're going to get to that, I assume, at some point, but just understanding how much waste is generated in the different countries is already a challenge. Not everybody is set up to measure how much waste is generated. And if you don't understand the magnitude of the problem, then it's very difficult to create solutions for it. So just, for example, compiling the information that is in this report was a monumental task, you know? And kudos to Silpa and to the whole team for having done that in a way that you presented, in a way that is comparable. And there are issues with some of the data. Not everything is perfect. We wish we had better and more data for everything. But just having an idea of how one region compares to another is a big deal, and very important for us to do our work better and to work with groups like yours too, and with the people that are connected, so that we can advance in how we manage waste around the world. So I think I spoke for more than 5 minutes, but the idea was just to sort of land a little bit of this amazing sort of context, and so that we can discuss practical ways in which we can work together.
Thank you, Silpa, and thank you, Catalina. That was pretty comprehensive, what you told us. So I'm going to quickly ask you the first question. So since this report builds from an earlier report, would you be able to compare the two and let us know what are the difference between that one and this one?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the earlier report, so Water Waste came out in 2012, and actually there was even an earlier report called Water Waste focused on specifically Asia, but the 2012 one was a global report, and it was really groundbreaking, you know, at the time. And even now, almost all the waste presentations I go to, I see those statistics, which is fantastic. But it was the first time that all global data was put in one place, and everyone was just excited to have it, you know. And really, since then, what we've been able to do, because countries are collecting more data, we were able to collect more types of data. I know I gave that big list earlier. So more types of data for many more countries and cities. And we were able to collect data for more recent years. So quite a bit of the data is actually from 2016, which is why, you know, we calibrated the waste generation data to 2016. So then we can compare across countries for a given year. And so we're not looking at it, you know, data for one country 5 years ago versus today, and we can compare more apples to apples. And we also try to standardize the data a bit more and had stricter definitions, and then try to merge that. The probably one other big difference is that we used an econometrics model to estimate the projections, and so because now we have the largest waste generation database, right? So we can use that to develop a relationship between GDP per capita of countries, and then estimate out how that'll change over time. And that methodology is listed in the book. And then in terms of the main findings that have changed since then, we found that overall recycling and composting increased. In low-income countries, we found that waste collection increased from about 22% before to 39% recently. And then the waste composition in low-income countries also changed a bit. We saw the fraction of organic waste drop by nearly 10%. And then probably the final comparison would be that we saw that in upper middle income countries, the waste to energy incineration adoption increased by almost 10%, and that's driven by China, actually. So.
Okay, thank you, Sulpa. So I just noticed that we have a bunch of questions coming in from the audience. So I'm going to quickly go over our questions first. So for the next question, I want to know who's the audience for the report and how do you think this report is going to help them?
Yeah, I think there's a really wide range for the audience. So, practitioners in local governments and national governments, academics, NGOs, international organizations, civil society. There's a really wide range of people. And I think it's because the data can be used in lots of different ways. The data can be used for planning purposes, even just to have a rough sense, because we have a lot of rich data around financing, for instance, and costs of not just technology, but also operations. So it'd be pretty helpful for cities and practitioners to use that, roughly to at least understand, okay, what is a rough ballpark, or to know, okay, what is the rough ballpark of waste that is being generated in our city. And then we also have data on operating models, and we have a wide set of case studies. And I think all of this information is helpful, not because we're not promoting any one practice over another, to be frank, but we wanted to include a really diverse set of experiences because each place will require a different angle. And so it's just good to know, well, what are different cities globally doing? And does that even make sense for our context? And to think a bit out of the box of what you might hear day to day.
Okay, yeah. I think Catalina sort of touched upon this when she was initially speaking, but if you could maybe give a few examples and go a little deeper on what kind of solution framework does the World Bank get into with respect to, it could be a policy, it could be financing, it could be implementation. So if you could just, I know that you did explain a little bit of it, so maybe if you could give a few examples, it might just be clearer.
Of course. And I think it, as you say, it depends. So as I try to stress, then it depends very much on the country, no, and what the entry point is, and where you start looking at the waste, no, and there's the other difference is whether you're looking at it at the national level or where you're talking to a city government, no. So that there's different things that you need to look at. Let's say if we go to the national level and we're talking to a Ministry of Environment or a Ministry of Urban Development. What we typically do and what we like to try to help with is to understand what is the institutional framework, what are the institutions that are involved with waste. No? In many countries, there are a lot of agencies that are involved with waste, and it is this fractured, they're not usually coordinated, or there's not a lot of interaction between these agencies. So you could have the drainage agencies, with the solid waste agencies, with the hospitals, all managing waste at different levels and with different roles or capacities, and they don't talk to each other. No? And if you have lack of coordination that it becomes very difficult to do things effectively. So understanding what is the institutional framework, who is responsible for the management of the waste? Bottom line, that is the question. Who is responsible for the different waste streams? How is that? How do you finance that? Who pays for that? Is it a government subsidy? Does the government pay for all of the waste collection activities, all of the waste management? Does the city pay for it? Do people in the households pay for it? How much do they pay for it? So all of that financing context is very, very important. And you have to start at the national level, to start looking at how that rolls down to the provincial, state level agencies, and then to the city level agencies. If you work with the cities, then you also look at those things. How are agencies coordinated? How are things paid for? But then you look more at the sector specifically. What is the infrastructure? So do you have household collection? Do you have separation? Do you have bins on the streets? Do you have transfer stations? Do you have landfills, or other waste management facilities? How do you pay for that? How can we build some of those things? So the infrastructure side of the equation is very large, and we typically get involved in a very big way in this, because we help plan what the system needs to look like or should be looking like, and then we help finance and bring all the actors together so that the infrastructure is in place. And then how do you operate and maintain that system? So it's not just build a landfill and then the problem is resolved. Is you need somebody to operate it right adequately, and you need money to come into the equation so that you can run it properly and maintain it. And then a very important part is, how do we engage with the informal sector? We do a lot of that, and that is not something that is often so talked about, or so well known, let's say, but we are very proud of the work that we have done with the informal sector. The informal sector is an enormous part of the equation in many cities. They do the collection, they do the recycling, and they do a lot of the disposal, depending on the level of the city. How do you make sure that the informal sector is addressed in a way that is equitable, that is safe, that is a job that provides a livelihood for all of those households that are working in that sector? So it's capacity. I forgot the how do we transfer this knowledge that we have from other places to make sure that we build a capacity at these different levels of government and with the private sector, so that we can address the system. So it's an institutional regulatory framework. Who's doing the enforcing? Are there laws for how you manage solid waste? So institutional regulation, big part of it. Then infrastructure, a big part of it. Then capacity, another part. And then there's the whole sort of management and financial sustainability of the thing. And then depending on where we are, we work on all of those sectors.
Thank you, Catalina. So let's head to the first audience question. I'm going to read this out. There is someone from Mozambique who is asking this question. What is a bank's approach to technology and equipment adaptation in developing countries, taking into account local limitations? So I'm just going to, yeah. So if you could respond to that.
Okay, sure. So like Catalina was saying, we really meet the government where they are, and meet the local government given the local context, where they are. And so if so the questions around technology and equipment adaptation, I mean, we certainly don't want any place that we work to be like a guinea pig. We want to understand what are the local constraints, what are proven solutions to meet those constraints, and we would work with the city to make sure that there's that capacity to ensure that solution can be sustainable. So we certainly wouldn't come in if there is not capacity for a certain technology. We certainly wouldn't even approach that without a bigger discussion around what that could mean longer term, and if it could work longer term, and if capacity could be built out longer term.
May I just add something to that? I think it's important that not all technologies work in every place, and you really need to look at the context and understand the context before you can recommend a technology. And a typical case is waste to energy, for instance, is a very good technology for certain types of situations, and it doesn't work in others. No? So depending on the level of maturity of your sector, do you have the right institutions? Do you have the right systems built in? And do you have enough money to pay for the level of technology that you're bringing in? Then, unless the conditions are right, not all technologies work. So you really need to do an incremental buildup before you can bring in a certain technology, and that is part of the analysis that needs to be done, and the conversation that you have to have with the government. Not because they're selling this technology as the solution for all problems related to waste. Does that mean that it's going to work in your city? No? So we really need to understand that, and we help the mayors and the governments understand whether one thing is good for one technology is good for the city or not.
Okay. And I see that we have our next question from D in Mexico, who said that actually we have legislation and some policies in waste management. First, Latin America and Caribbean and development country in OECD, and maybe not so advanced in institutional and organizational framework. We have a lot of people working in the informal sector. In your experience, which are the first steps or drivers we need to achieve in Latin American countries? I mean, I think it links back to what Catalina was saying earlier. First of all, I mean, every country, even within LAC, every country will be different. Every city will be different. And so that local context is really key. And then the entry point will completely depend on, what Catalina was saying earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I worked a lot in Latin America, and I think the informal, there are so many cities that have brilliant experiences working with the informal sector, including in Mexico. No, it's a less well-known part of the solid waste management value chain, and so I think a lot of awareness needs to be raised in different models that had worked in different parts. Brazil has fantastic experiences. Argentina has very good experience. I'm from Colombia. Colombia has very good experiences, and it's raising the awareness of these associations of solid waste management speakers, of how they have organized themselves to supply to deliver a service. Bottom line, that is what the ultimate goal is, that you organize in different ways depending on the context, the informal sector, so that it can serve as a critical service provider along this chain. No? And that requires institutional change in some ways, financial changes, and a lot of behavioral change, no? Both from the informal sector and from the formal sector, to accept this new group as an important part of the solid waste management chain.
Okay, so the next question is from Sam, and Sam is saying, won't development of world-based solutions where different nations can contribute be more effective than developing different approaches for the same waste streams like plastics and marine litter? Oh, I see. Okay, well, I guess I'll start off and Catalina can jump in. But so the World Bank is tackling this issue more and more. It's very much on our radar, and we're both doing investment projects and technical assistance for countries related to plastics and marine litter. And I don't know if I completely understand the question, but I'll just say that when we're talking about marine litter and plastics entering waterways and eventually our oceans, what we're talking about is land-based waste management solutions need to be strengthened, right? So we need to prevent that waste from ending up in the waterways. So that means we need to collect the waste, we need to find a safe place to put it and manage it in an environmentally responsible way. And that's certainly what the World Bank's bread and butter is. It's really making sure in most of the places we work, it's focusing on the collection, treatment, disposal side of waste management.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you in a sense that it's we really need to tackle the solid waste management issue in general, and within those there are some particular types of waste that are capturing more or less attention. Plastics obviously because of its importance and the increase in its use is a very is something that people are focusing on right now. But it can't just be plastics. No, we really need to make sure that the systems are in place to address solid waste in general, and within that waste stream, then you have plastics. No, so you have policies that cover the whole sector, and it's important that those remain, as you say, global, and that people keep the focus on waste. And then within that, then okay, we can go into the different waste streams, and it's important to do that as well. But not forgetting it's broader than a particular waste stream. Is that the next one? Okay. Okay, let me read the next one. Yes. What is the World Bank's opinion on the economic and financial sustainability of the public services of urban cleaning and solid waste management through the institution of waste tax tariffs? Okay. Maybe I can start with that one. This is a complicated question again because it depends. I mean, I will always start my questions because my answers are based on that. I think it is difficult to start charging for a service that you are not providing and that you are not receiving. So if you're a household, before I start paying money, a fee or a tariff for solid waste provision, I want to see some service and I want to see an improvement in the way the waste is addressed. So so what we'd like to see, or what we recommend, or what we have seen has worked in places, is to have a period in which you begin to communicate and to show people that you are providing a service. You start charging nominal amounts of a fee for that service provision, and then you incrementally increase the cost of that service provision up until the point where you have what we call cost recovery. If you don't have a service where you can recover the cost of providing that service is not sustainable. So you have to figure out how you can charge for that service in a way that people can pay for it and are willing to pay for it. And people are willing to pay for the services that they receive. So you have to do a little bit of an analysis, how much people are willing to pay, how much can they pay. I mean, you cannot charge for something that households are not able to afford. I mean, you don't want to, let's just say. But then you start accommodating, you start calculating what is the balance, the right balance, where those who can pay more could pay more for a service, but ultimately where you need to recover the cost of that service. Otherwise things ultimately are not sustainable. You cannot provide the service if you can't pay for it.
And so there's a World Bank project in the West Bank that uses this approach, actually. So it's a results-based financing focused approach for proof of service provision while increasing the user fee. And we use that example in the book, actually. So if you look in the financing chapter in the book, you'll see some examples, and you will also see data on what kind of different levers you might have. So, we found that if you collect that tariff through a joint utility bill, you have a higher rate of recovering the fee than if you collect door to door. But then again, it is context specific. And then another variation could be a variability in the tariff itself, like Catalina was saying, that high income areas pay more, or you pay by volume of waste that you're disposing. So there are a lot of different models and levers you can play with in addition to what Catalina was saying. Okay.
So Claire is asking, do you know of examples of the World Bank working with clients on lowering consumption or implementing policies that support a circular economy? Does decreasing consumption rank high or low in the priorities of countries? Yeah, very good question. So yes, we have lots of examples for different cities, for different types of waste reduction. We worked in Brazil, for instance, a lot in putting sort of bag laws in certain cities that were successful in some cities, not so successful in others. We work on food waste, for instance. How do you reduce the amount? And Argentina has some very, very good examples of policies and programs where the amount of food food waste was reduced from 30%, which is sort of the average thing, to substantial amounts by different types of recycling. Recycling, of course, is a big deal. No, how do you begin to separate, and what technologies or what measures do you bring in to begin to separate the waste? I think there's a lot of very good examples in Latin America of projects and cities who have made substantial improvements in reducing the amount of waste they produce.
Yeah, and also in Ningbo, China, we have a project that's using results-based financing to have communities separate out organic waste, and then the municipality returns a portion of the savings that they see back to the communities. So that incentivizes them to separate out their organics and their recyclables, and then the municipality uses them for an anaerobic digester, and then with manufacturers. We're also using a similar approach in Jamaica in in some of the most volatile communities to also go from dumping and burning garbage to now separating out organics and recyclables to use them productively. Oh, sure. Okay. Okay, from Sian, from Trinidad and Tobago. What have you seen in terms of Caribbean waste statistics? And does the World Bank support organizations in waste reduction solutions, whether grants, loans, etc.? So I would say I don't know the specific numbers for the Caribbean, but I would say that definitely island countries we've seen have higher waste generation per capita than other countries because you have to import in a lot of waste. And then also the Caribbean, there's a very high tourism and kind of cruise ship sector, right? And so naturally there's a higher waste generation per capita. So does the World Bank support organizations? So the World Bank works at a national level. And so if the government is interested in taking a loan or is interested in technical assistance, then the World Bank would be more than happy to have that dialogue around waste reduction solutions.
Yeah, we typically don't engage at the level of individual organizations, private sector or non-governmental organizations. It is primarily an engagement or work with government agencies.
Okay. Okay, and I think we have one last one.
Okay. Beauvalin. In short, what are the similarities of global waste management between Africa and the rest of the world? In short, that's a loaded question.
And we have 1 minute left.
I think the principles are the same. No, I think the principles are, there is a value chain and you cannot cut corners if you want to do a sustainable solution for solid waste management. What you do have to understand is where you're starting along this chain so that you can provide those solutions that fit within the context. No, I don't think that there is anything different per se in the way that Africa generates waste. It's a different kind of waste and it's a different way of addressing waste, but it is ultimately the same value chain, and we just need to understand what you're dealing with in order to resolve it.
That's good.
Thank you, Sulpa, and thank you, Catalina. We have one more question if you would have the time for it. If not, we could. Okay, all right. I've just put it up there, and you can have a look at the question and respond to that. So that'll be our last question.
Okay, great. Okay, this is Fabricio again. In your opinion, what is the stage of implementation from a global perspective of the concept of extended producer responsibility or shared responsibility for the product life cycle? Okay, I mean, we're certainly seeing this, we're increasingly seeing this in our conversations, for sure, with governments, especially, you know, one of the biggest challenges is financial sustainability for the sector. And so, so this has been a very key part of that, I would say, a key revenue source, I think, increasingly, but I don't know if you want to.
So I think that I have seen sort of in the conversations in the engagements that we have, so circular economy is an agenda that started by sort of the EU and the more developed countries. So countries where the solid waste management economy or sector is well managed, and where you want to make it even more efficient, and then start looking at the whole circular economy thing. I think that is obviously where we would aim to go. I mean, in a generation or in 50 years, we would aim to be there for the developing world. I think it's difficult sometimes to adapt those more sophisticated, more evolved ways of looking at the whole system when we still have to address the very beginning, the very early stages of management. So I think it should be an aspiration to get to, and you can definitely embed in the regulation and in the institutions the principle that will help you get there in the long run. But I think you have to be practical in how you implement that. To think that you can go to zero waste or to circular economy in a context where you have very, very beginning institutions and very beginning at the beginning of a sector, I think is not very practical, and one has to be careful. I don't want to say it cannot be done, but from our experience, it needs to be a phased, incremental approach with an aspiration to get to a system that would work in those levels.
Thank you so much, Sulfa, and thank you, Catalina. I think we had a fairly wide range of questions from the audience, and we covered a lot more from the audience questions than we did with mine. So do you have any last words to add before we wrap this up?
Just thank you very much for having us. We really enjoyed talking to you and sharing the World Bank examples as well as data from the book.
Yes, same here. I just really I love the fact that this book these data are so well used. That is the purpose, that we can benchmark, and then we can raise awareness, and then we can begin to prioritize and drill down on what needs to be done in the different countries. So I think this has been a great experience, and we look forward to doing more of these.
Thank you so much. And I'm sure the book will be super good. I can imagine a wide range of people actually using it. So thank you to the audience as well. And just a reminder that next week we have a panel where Adam Reed is going to moderate, and he's going to be talking to Mike Webster from Waste Aid UK. So please go to events on our website and sign up for it. And we hope to see you all there as well. Thanks once again, Sulfa and Catalina. So we will be in touch. And when we put this event up on our website, we will also give the link to the World Bank report so that everyone can access that as well. All right.
Excellent.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank everybody for connecting. Bye.
Bye.